Insert the usual shilling, like, comment, subscribe, rate, share, whatever you want. Well, let's begin. We start Stormbringer with a demon coming in front of some Melnibonians, telling them he couldn't find trace of Cimuriel or Irkun. The elves don't take this too good, and the leader of the group whips the beast, telling his men to bring new emissaries, or else the Emperor will invite them at his table, and their heads will be the main course on a silver platter. We now go to Dr. Jest, that was helping give birth to a child. I wouldn't get too attached to this scene or the child in general. The leader of the previous group that we talked about comes to the good doctor and tells him they found nothing in the human lands, but they do plan to look for more tomorrow. Jess lashes at him. Fun fact, in this he looks way more terrifying than he did in the Ruby Throne. He also says that tomorrow isn't good enough. He tells the leader to give him some news by the day's end, or else he will scry his entrails for them. Which is quite a gruesome scene. Hey look, it's Elric in a pool of blood with 3 naked women next to him. I wonder how this will end. He looks depressed. He salutes Jess' courage to come in front of him empty-handed. The good doctor tells Elric that they couldn't find them and they don't really have news. They look through all the young kingdoms with demons, elementals, and sorcerers, but they are not there. Now they must look beyond them. Elric snaps and says he doesn't care where they are not and why the doctor failed him. He wants them found and alive, so he could grant Cimuriel the vengeance she deserves against her brother. Elric wants Irkun to suffer. He wants his head. At this point, Elric is furious, pushing the women aside, killing them somehow, and lashes at the doctor in front of him. He just calls him pathetic, just insults him, and says he will have his head. But during this whole tantrum, the doctor stands unmoving, even as Elric commands him to kneel, and is basically laying on him, since, Elric is kind of weak. Just telling the Emperor that he mustn't, he's too weak. This reinforces even more the idea that, he is weak, and without his cousin wife, he's effectively useless. So much so that even the subjects that respected him, they aren't afraid of him. Elric has a breakdown alone, and says even Ariok has forsaken him. Speak of the wolf, here comes Ariok, apologizing for being delayed. The Lord of Chaos was caught up with some delectable champions of law, which can mean a bunch of things. Elric begs him, and the Lord of Chaos tells him he knows that the blood of his ancestors was hardly a gift, and offers him his own blood to restore the Emperor's strength. Interesting scene. Ariok then realizes that Elric needs Cimuriel, not only because he loves her or for revenge, but because without her, what will he do? He would be too weak to rule properly. Ariok confirms she is alive. Elric asks for his help in finding her, but Ariok can't do much. There are some places that even he, a Lord of Chaos, can't appear without being summoned. And apparently, Irkun knows this. But still, Ariok decides to tell Elric where they are and help him reach them. Because, he cannot appear there without being summoned, doesn't say he can't help somebody reach that place. Ariok then grants him a strange looking artifact. It's like a red fruit or something. On a cliff during a storm, we have Elric and Divim that comes riding to him. Tavar asks his emperor what is happening. The army is mobilizing, the battle barges are being loaded, and blood rituals are being made. Elric tells him they found Irkun. Of course, Divim says that such a mobilization force would look like an invasion. How would the young kingdoms perceive this? In the end, Elric doesn't care. The Master of Swords marches with them. He orders for his dragons to be awakened, or his dragon in this case. Divim advises against that. Elric isn't taking any of this and asks Divim if, after all his failures, he would have him wait one more day to save Cimmeril. Divim reluctantly accepts the orders of his emperor, but still advises against going to war now. That's because the season of storm has started, and that would make passing the waters even harder than before, for sorcerers or dragon alike. Elric curses the elemental lords, but the King of Seas is quick to come in front of Elric, telling him that the elementals are concerned regarding his relation with Ariok. But they promised they would help him, and so they would do. As a new reader into Elric, this is telling you something you might have already guessed already. No deals are made that are in favors of those summoning the Lords of Chaos, and maybe not even the Elemental Lords. Divim takes with him 2 children, his children, while going down into a chasm, and that is the resting place of the dragons. Those children are his sons, I think I've mentioned this. He's taking them to show them how the dragons are awoken, and to prepare them for their future. For once, they will not be his sons, but his equals. He talks about how the dragons judge someone as worthy, and that is quite a gruesome process of melting skin, bone, and being eaten alive. But, despite the whole process of dying and torture, if they are accepted by the dragons, they would be reborn and become masters of them. He gives his sons an interesting explanation why he brought them here. And I really like this part. I know you are young, but should fate separate us, I wish to entrust you with the only creatures in this world whose hearts I can fathom without fear of losing myself. I like this one, it's quite poetic. While saying that last part, we get a panel of Elric holding his head in one hand and the artifact in another, looking exhausted. Maybe a sign of the blood of Ariok losing its effect, or maybe his own thoughts running wild in his head. Strasha, the Sea King, the King of Seas, calls for Elric and tells him that the seas promised to help, and so they did, by giving him a gigantic ship that could sail on both land and sea. Divim comes and, like everybody else there, is quite surprised at this miracle. With this gift, Elric grants the wish of Divim. The dragons are left to sleep, the ships are left in the port, and they will only leave with 50 men. The catch is, they will leave right now. On the gigantic ship, Divim is reluctant, as one should be when he faces such a gift. He isn't so sure about things around him. This ship, granted by Strasha, created by the elemental lords of sea and earth, has no steer. They don't know where they're going. But Elric reassures him that this ship doesn't sail the seas, but masters them, and that Strasha gave him the ability to control the ship with his mind. Divim is worried about the lack of weapons on the ship, not really made for sea combat, but Elric reassures him the elemental lords will not let anything happen to their ship. We get a panel where Elric is content, though as much as I applaud the drawing and coloring and these comic series, the picture of Elric here is weird. Nevertheless, nighttime falls, and Divim talks to Elric about how he is in high spirits right now, and it's been a while since he saw his emperor like that. Elric has all the reasons to be in a good mood. The king of the sea elementals guides him to his love. The master of swords is on his side, and he will have Irkun at his feet. But the Vim is worried about the prophecy that Strasha talked about. Now what I'm saying this is, earlier on the cliff, Strasha mentions a prophecy of sorts. And that's talking about the destruction of Melniboné and basically his lover dying by his hands. Thing that got the Vim worried. Of course, initially Elric thinks he's referring to the destruction of Melniboné. But that's not it. What the Vim is referring to is the death of Cimmeril at Elric's hands. Elric responds with this line: Devim Tavar, judge me not by the image of the man the mighty would make of me in their dreams. That future is not mine yet. Don't be fooled by this, because the very next page is a nightmare sequence where Elric sees Cimmeril bloodied. Here's something more interesting. She says the same lines from the beginning of the Ruby Throne. Elric, my love, summon me, call for me, curse me, for soon we shall be reunited. The image that accompanies these last two is quite an impactful one that follows the same style as the one from the Ruby Throne with the black silhouettes and the sky and tears being red. But it's more gruesome than that one that was more tragic for Cimmeril. Elric wakes up from this nightmare screaming Cimmeril's name. Devin comes to him and asks if he had nightmares. He had been calling for a name for quite a while. The other soldiers couldn't get sleep. Elric ignores that and asks how far from the shore are they. Everything went good, Devim answers, until a mist recently rised. And only Elric knows where they are going. But when Elric tries to control the ship, to steer it, the ship doesn't listen to him. And when he looks to the side, he sees that the ship is not sailing on water anymore. Elric deduces quickly, after catching some mud in his hand, because that's supposed to be seafoam, that the elemental lord of the earth is steering their ship now. Grom, the lord of the earth, wants his ship back, wanting to throw our heroes into the middle of the earth, a volcano, the molten core, whatever you want to call it. Elric tells him that they are the guests of Strasha, and that the ship was entrusted to them. But the earth replies he is not the king of the seas, and that they are not his guests. Elric still tries to talk to the king of the earth, and tell him they are not enemies. But the earth has no enemies. The earth gives, and the earth takes. The ship is turning to stone, though it was kind of already made of stone. It doesn't matter. Elric still tries to argue that he would kill his men for a ship? That's not really fitting. Grom doesn't kill. Grom balances. Earth for earth. A rock for a rock. The Melnibonians start falling to their doom. Devim, of course, manages to save Elric from falling into the opening of the earth. And Grom says something that I really like, and it's interesting, and seeing what happens to the ship kind of reflects it. He says that the seas lied. The seas always lie. Grom never lies. He promised nothing to Melniboné. That ship belongs to him. Elric and some of his men, of course not the full 50 of them, manage to escape, and he is pissed, telling the elemental lords to keep their false promises. For he serves only chaos now. Elric tells his men to start moving. Devim and some of the others ask of the wounded and the dead that need to be honored. But the Emperor tells them that those that wish to honor them can stay with them there. He cares not for their fates. The next scene, we have the Melnibonians going through a village. And it looks your typical depiction of a mud village, medieval, everything brown and gray. that you see in many generic fantasy works and so on. Things aren't looking that good in the village. There's a dog that barks at them. They kill the dog. They take some of the horses from there. I guess you can say they steal some horses, but that doesn't really make sense since the place looked abandoned. But they managed to ride on the horses. They are now in a forest. But I won't judge you if you thought it was a jungle. It's really drawn to look like that. Devim asks Elric if he is worried about the life of Cimmeril. But Elric knows his cousin will keep her alive until he gets what he wants from him. Devim presumes this is his life for hers. But Elric doesn't think so. If his cousin wanted him dead, he would be dead by now. He had ample opportunities. A boar comes running towards Elric, but he gets shot and insta-killed by arrows, which isn't the thing that happens with boars. They have thick hides and hair that makes it kinda hard to shoot them with regular modern bolts, let alone some weird arrows from there. Anyway, Elric says they now have dinner. Some kids in the trees say that is their boar. So of course Elric changes his mind and says that this isn't a mere dinner, but a feast. Oh boy. Then this next part you need to read for yourself because it's quite interesting, especially if you want to know more things relating to this. So let's begin. There's this human settlement that the kids were from that take in Elric and his men as guests. They feast upon that because Melnibonians like eating and the humans don't really get that much or at all. One of the kids that killed the boar dares to ask Elric, what are Melnibonians? He never heard of them. And this enrages the kid's father. Of course, Elric tries to play it to cool him down that it's a kid. And look how much has Melniboné fallen, that the mortals don't fear it anymore. And then we change scenery. They are now in the mountains, walking through snow. And if you're curious what happened with the humans, well, Devim asks and talks about the state of Melniboné in this case, because the humans don't fear them. And what Elric did was a good thing. For you see, the humans that had Elric and his men as guests had a quite tragic and gruesome fate. Imagine the same fate that the people that housed Guts and the Band of the Hawk while they were saving Griffith had once Wild came to them. Okay, not as gruesome, it's just head on spikes and dead bodies. Not what Wild was doing, but nevertheless, you get the idea. Some of Elric's men find marks in the snow that shows that this place was once a war zone between law and chaos, and the marks are from law. But Elric assures them that neither law nor chaos has been there in ages. Devim is really surprised at this point and asks Elric where he is taking them. And Elric only answers that to Irkun's grave. They reach the ruins of the city of Dozkam. Devim warns Elric that his cousin is too proud to hide, and also too cowardly to lay in wait alone. But of course, Elric cares not. He has come not for a duel, but for an execution. And Ariok marches with him. The Master of the Swords marches with him. Another interesting aspect here is that we get some exposition about the city. Apparently, it rivaled Melniboné in the splendor of perversion for the glory of chaos. Blood orgies and the rest, as you can imagine. So much so that Law brought golems and titans and champions to fight and destroy the city. And of course, the inhabitants that had humans and demons walking side by side and living side by side responded back in kind. But before a winner was declared, a freezing spell came over the city, and now the warriors are stuck in an endless struggle, petrified as statues, recreating their last moments alive and in battle. Now, of course, one of the Melnibonians asks who did the spell, and Elric doesn't really know. Most people don't really know what that is, but he makes a reference that it might have been balance itself, if such a thing even exists. This is a nice reference to balance here, and it will play an important part in the story later on. Devim is a little bit confused because apparently there is a city with the same name, but Elric tells him it was built centuries later, and in fact it's smaller and it's a fishing port, so it's not that grandiose as this one. And we get a demon attack, random demon attack. There's a bunch of them. Elric wants to fight, but Devim convinces him that this isn't his fight and tells him to save their queen. We get an awesome panel where Devim jumps towards a demon screaming for the Emperor. Now, if Games Workshop stole from Elric, I think Elric can steal from them. Something tells me Games Workshop stole this from Elric initially, the line for the Emperor. Whatever, let's continue. Irkun stands above a sleeping Cimriel, promising to wake her from her slumber. Elric reaches him, and they exchange a few words. Mostly Elric telling his cousin that he will weep with joy when his queen dances on her brother's corpse, and if he really plans to fight Elric with a knife, then Elric will not weep for long. Of course, Irkun says he needs only a dagger to become emperor, to destroy Elric, and not even spill his blood. He stabs Cimriel and calls for Arioch. Yeah, that's quite an interesting turn of events. Arioch comes and calls them both his favorite Melnibonians. Important to note that. The Chaos Lord is quite confused on who to pick. He can only grant one favor. But to who? Give back a life he took? Or a throne he vowed to defend? Which to pick, which to pick? He doesn't need to hear the pleas of the two mortals in front of him, because he already knows. But he offers them a solution. He gives them both one of his daughters, and wants them to kill each other, so there is only one winner. For Irkun, he gives him Mournblade. Yes, that's where Warcraft got the name from, and, well, the whole concept from. Now, if only they recognized it and didn't act like Witcher fans for it, it will be better. Nevertheless, let's continue. And he gives to Elric Stormbringer. Important, yeah, no, it's the name of the title. Awesome. The two have a nice but, quite frankly, short fight, and I wish it lasted more. Elric manages to overpower his cousin and puts him to the ground. And while he is preparing to strike, he hears his sword talking, telling him to kill his cousin and take his soul. But Elric refuses. Arioch gets pissed, so much so that he changes from his whitish complexion of a child to something more starly, more dark. And it's interesting. And asks Elric if he denies him. But Elric brings up an interesting thing. He promised to serve Arioch if he would help him. He is not bound to take the soul of his cousin. He is not bound to kill his own blood for nothing. He has defeated Irkun and Mournblade, I guess. And Elric is willing to keep his promise of serving Arioch, if Arioch is willing as well. Remember, Arioch right now is pissed. He's very angry at Elric, gives him some mean words. But he gives Cimriel her life back. Still, during this whole process, he says that he did not give Elric a simple sword. He wed him to one of his daughters, and he must love her and feed her. Whatever that means, the queen is back and alive, that's important. Elric leaves with her and his treacherous cousin. Of course, Cimoril in his arms and Irkun in chains. On a ship back, Cimoril lays next to Elric, trying to flirt with him that she will solve his problems and use her cure on him once they get back, but until then, she has something else for the Emperor. Of course, Elric can hear the sword asking to be fed. And who does the sword want to eat? Cimoril. Elric stands up, tells him to be left alone, and gets to leave. Cimoril is scared, and Elric answers that he's scared for her as well, because it's not a good situation. Whew, that's interesting. The sword is really willing to feed on anything if it's given the chance. Going on top of the ship, he finds, you know what, he's the character that talked about the city at some point. Really makes a short appearance, but whatever. He finds this random character, and they exchange a few lines about the needs and wants of Melniboné and the things that an emperor must do. The random character says that he would give his life for his empire and his emperor. So Elric stabs him with Stormbringer, feeding it. Nice. The next panels are the Great Triumph, coming back home with the traitor and the queen. And people are cheering loudly. They are in love with this spectacle and seeing the traitor brought to his heels, whatever one you like. We got a panel showing Irkun suspended in air by chains, Elric on his throne with his queen, and of course, people happily welcome him back. But during these panels, we get a discussion between Elric and Stormbringer, where the sword tells Elric if he feeds her, she will feed him back. They will grow together in strength and power. As you can imagine, the sword really is hungering. Frostmourne hungers, right? Stormbringer hungers, that's a real problem. Nevertheless, once this is done, Irkun is brought in front of Elric and Cimoril and the other nobles to make a spectacle of how punishing his fate will be. Of course, Cimoril takes the lead and promises her brother the most gruesome ending, the most terrible thing. He will be sent as an example to all Melnibonians of what happens to those that defy and try to harm the Emperor. And his punishment lays in the hands of the Emperor he tried to usurp and betray. Elric tells her to stop, which comes as a shock, but you'll see why. Arioch granted him 2 favors that day. First, he saved the life of his queen and his love. Second, he wed him to one of his daughters, Stormbringers. So, he must keep his own promise to Arioch. And then, in a move that surprised everyone, Elric comes down from his throne and he crowns Irkun as the emperor and declares that he will exile himself to the young kingdoms. Should anyone try to come after him, the punishment is death. Cimoril is going ballistic at this. She is upset, claiming that he leaves her in the hands of Irkun, her brother that tried to kill her. Elric, of course, tells her she has nothing to fear of Irkun anymore, but she isn't taking any of that. She's upset at the notion of leaving not only Melniboné, but also her, and, well, putting Irkun on the throne. There's a pretty interesting line, I have to say here, where Cimoril claims that if he leaves, he is no longer lover to her, no longer emperor, and no longer Melnibonian. Elric just leaves as Cimoril screams in the background. And in the end, we get the same words we got from the Ruby Throne. Summon me, call for me, curse me, embrace me, my love, for we are reunited at last. Yes, those were the words of Stormbringer, the sword. I know. It's quite a magnificent tale. It progressed the story very well. I liked the coloring in this one. I liked everything about it, to be honest. The fight scene against Irkun could have been longer, and I wish it was longer. It would have made sense to be longer. But we have to deal with what we have to deal, and this was good enough. It's another amazing part in an amazing story and the series that I wholeheartedly recommend you read and go through. You will not be disappointed with Stormbringer. Especially not after Ruby Throne. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.